I mean, they do good supportive work, Mark says, with that billion-dollar smirk that makes interns swoon and shareholders nod like bobbleheads on Red Bull. But let's be honest, core innovation. That's marketing, not metrics. Evelyn doesn't flinch. Just sips her lukewarm coffee from a mug that says I void warranties. The irony's not lost on her, because she built the damn model that told the company 2 months ago that Gen Z was about to abandon their flagship product line like rats from a leaking influencer yacht. Her charts practically screamed it. But Mark wanted vibes, not vallas. He called her team non-essential with the same tone a surgeon might use for an appendix. Right here, on the 27th floor, open office layout that looked like an IKEA showroom had a panic attack. Evelyn sat back, eyes scanning the whiteboard where someone had written Q3 goals: bold, lean, future, in blue marker like it was a spell that might summon a clue. They'd asked her to generate visuals for Mark's upcoming interview with a major business network. Just for reference, said his assistant, who blinked like she didn't quite believe it either. Evelyn nodded, said sure, and opened the sandboxed version of the Insight engine she called Mirror Lake. No one else knew it by that name. Company servers, it had a much blander ID, DS147B. The kind of label you could bury in an invoice and never raise eyebrows. By the way, since we're 5 steps deep in corporate gaslighting and you're still listening, maybe tap that follow button real quick. I'm clawing toward my first 10,000 subscribers like a Wall Street intern clinging to their last stock option. You tapping that would mean the world, especially since 95% of folks listening ghost me like Mark ghosted Logic. Back to Evelyn. The heat wasn't rage, not exactly. It was cold fury with frostbite. Because 2 years ago, they asked her to build something that sees around corners. And she did. She really, really did. Mirror Lake could predict consumer sentiment shifts before TikTok noticed them, and flagged regional purchasing patterns that made supply chains look psychic. Yet, she was still sitting under a flickering LED light in a corner pod, while the CEO shined on camera and fed CNBC the narrative of a lifetime. Bold Mark Keener leans out legacy bloat. Never mind that her model caught the last crypto crash 3 weeks early, or that it adjusted for sentiment volatility during the Q2 Ukraine impact before the Fed even breathed about rates. No, that wasn't brand forward. Request came in at 8:47 a.m. from his EA, "Hey Evelyn, could you prep 3-4 slides on trend deltas in the youth market, just for background during the interview? He won't mention you or the team on air, just wants context. Context, like the stage lighting for a magician. Something to vanish into while he made the real act, his ego, float." Evelyn smiled, nodded. She'd already written the slides 3 weeks ago. In fact, it already flagged the pattern that showed their core demographic was slowly shifting to a hybrid model nobody upstairs even noticed. And she'd wrapped that flag in metadata and quietly mirrored it to a secure drive. The story she was building, it wasn't one for Mark. It wasn't even for her bosses. It was for the system that would come next. For the inevitable reckoning, because she didn't need credit. She didn't even need applause. She just needed the right eyes to see what came next. And they would. The memo hit inboxes at 3:07 p.m. on a Wednesday that already smelled like stale vendor cupcakes and quiet dread. Subject line, strategic alignment update. That's how you know you're about to be metaphorically throat-punched by someone who uses impact as a verb. Evelyn opened it, blinked once, exhaled like a poker player watching someone else's hand fold exactly the way she expected. Effective end of quarter, the data strategy division will be sunset as part of our long-term streamlining efforts. Redundancies identified. Affected teams will be contacted directly by HR for transition planning. Sunset, huh? They killed the engine and called it a sunset. If corporate America had a thesaurus for murder, strategic realignment would be first degree. Round her, the reactions started rolling in like slow-motion train wrecks. Margot at the next desk, who spent 3 years building the predictive health model that quietly saved the company $18 million in insurance losses, started trembling as she refreshed Slack. Dev, the junior data scientist who still lived with his parents, actually said, "But we were ahead of projections." Poor kid. Evelyn didn't blink. She'd seen it coming in the tea leaves of leadership reshuffles and the sudden flood of efficiency reviews run by consultants who couldn't tell a database from a dinner plate. She had one tab open already, her secured Proton mail. Another one, a folder labeled Nova Archive Legacy. It wasn't technically company property, not this version. She'd made sure of that. The anonymized model outputs were scrubbed, filtered, stripped of any identifiable patterns tied to proprietary infrastructure. It was just patterns, human behavior in data form, and she had plenty of it. Months' worth. 6 weeks ago, she'd had a quiet coffee with a woman named Cynthia Brose, an ethics attorney who specialized in AI compliance and intellectual property entanglements. "I have a hypothetical client," Evelyn said, stirring her bitter espresso in a bland hotel bar, whose work was built on company time but whose conceptual structure predates employment. It's been anonymized, sanitized, no source code, no client-specific vectors, just output from a black box privately maintained. Cynthia raised an eyebrow, and this hypothetical client wants to ensure she isn't sued into oblivion if she, say, partners with someone else. Evelyn nodded once. Exactly. Cynthia smiled. Sounds like your client's already 10 moves ahead. That's rare. Rare wasn't the word for it. Evelyn's version of calm was the kind you find under ice. Still, beautiful, deadly. The memo confirmed it. Mark was planning a bloodless coup. Erase the back-end brain trust and spin it as trimming fat. He didn't understand what she'd built, didn't care. He wanted buzzwords, not behavioral forecasting. Wanted quarterly sizzle, not quiet architecture. Which meant he was about to walk blind into a model that already predicted him. Evelyn closed the memo, stood, and walked to the tiny window overlooking the downtown skyline. A blue light blinked from the building opposite, just an elevator sensor, but it reminded her of the status LED on her home server. The one still humming quietly in a climate-controlled closet. The one named Echo Farm. She wasn't angry. Anger implies surprise. No, she was surgical now, and the scalpel was already in motion. The call wasn't scheduled. Evelyn didn't bother with pleasantries or the usual LinkedIn-flavored small talk. She just dialed the number from memory, the one she hadn't used in 3 years, and leaned back in her chair like it was any other Tuesday. 3 rings, a soft click. Then that familiar gravel-coated voice. "This is Alan. Still using a landline," she said. "God, I forgot how analog you are." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Evie, I figured you either died or became a VC." "Worse," she said. "Got optimized." That got a longer silence. She didn't waste time. Just dropped the line like a match into dry brush. "Thought you might want to see what your old thesis student built before they decided to kill it." Alan Broderick had been her graduate advisor at Columbia, legend in behavioral econometrics. Now semi-retired, but still whispering into the ears of legacy firms like Kalis Analytics, and more relevantly, Verity Group, employers' most terrifying rival. Verity wasn't louder, just smarter, patient. The kind of company that hired people who read white papers for fun and used words like inflection point without sounding like assholes. She hit send. The file was small, maybe 3 MB zipped, but inside it was a goldmine. A digest version of Mirror Lake's rolling trend matrix. Not proprietary, not directly. No company logos, no internal code, just anonymized inference data. Shifts in consumer trust signals, product fatigue maps, volatility clouds tied to regional influencers. Academic format. Clean. Alan opened it in silence. Then, "Jesus, you always said I overbaked," she murmured. "This isn't overbaked. This is predictive artillery. Where did you get half these data layers?" "I grew them," she said simply. Fed it social echo patterns and adjusted for timestamp distortion. He whistled. "Tell me you're not giving this to Keener." "I'm not giving anything to Keener. I'm giving it to history. And I'm giving you a copy under academic license, review only. No deployment, no attribution, just test it. If you think it's nonsense, delete it. If not, act as you see fit." Alan didn't reply right away. Finally, he said, "You're walking a hell of a line, Evie. I know, I've mapped it." That night, she poured herself a bourbon and stood in her apartment window, watching headlights arc like lazy neurons across the bridge. The bottle had dust on the rim, gift from a client she once saved from a pricing model disaster. She didn't drink much anymore, but tonight called for ritual, because this wasn't sabotage. This wasn't corporate warfare. It was a calibration, a test. She had given her model to someone who would know what to do, not just tactically, but ethically. Alan wouldn't burn the building down. He'd run the fire drill, maybe adjust the smoke sensors. But if the building was already creaking, if the wiring was already bad, then Verity would move quietly, strategically, like sharks in fog. Evelyn took a sip. It burned like memory. She didn't need to watch what Alan would do. She already knew. The first drop was in the water. The ripple would come. All she had to do now was wait for the tide. It started with a tweet. Verity announces unexpected expansion into the Microlux home tech sector. New partnerships across Asia and Eastern Europe. Market stunned. The timestamp was 6:14 a.m. By 7:02, Bloomberg picked it up. By 8 o'clock, it was on the ticker. Verity Group stock up 20% on aggressive new segment strategy. A bold move, said one analyst, and weirdly well-timed. Weirdly. Evelyn almost smiled at that. She sat at her usual spot, second booth from the back in a coffee shop near her apartment, kind of place that overcharged for oat milk and played vinyl like it mattered. Her laptop sat closed. No Slack pings, no dashboards, just a headline lighting up her phone like a signal flare in the fog. She stirred her coffee without looking, letting the espresso marble the cream in slow spirals. Watching the markets react to her work through someone else's hand felt like standing behind glass, while the house burned, your house, your match. Someone else screaming fire. Mark Keener, meanwhile, had no idea his stage was being built on a fault line. At precisely 8:47 a.m., the company's internal comms blasted a smiling portrait of him. Don't miss CEO Mark Keener live on Insight Today this Friday. Topic: Leadership in Innovation. The irony nearly made her laugh into her cup, because Mark still thought he was the storm. The face, the name, the brave butcher of bloat, didn't realize he was already inside someone else's model, that every public word he'd speak Friday would be watched through a different lens now. Evelyn tapped her phone. Screenshot. Saved the tweet, not because she needed it, but because history deserved receipts. She remembered how Mark once walked past her desk during an all-hands and said, "Keep grinding, Evelyn. Every system needs a nervous system, right?" He thought it was a compliment. A nervous system doesn't just collect. It reacts, it remembers, it learns. And she had learned. That being visible wasn't the same as being respected. That waiting for recognition in corporate America was like waiting for your printer to apologize. It wasn't coming. So she stopped waiting. Now, Verity had executed a near-perfect move into a segment their own company dismissed 6 months ago as premature. Their language, their tone, even their projected margins sounded eerily familiar. Evelyn hadn't given them blueprints, just the weather patterns. But Alan had used them well, and the markets knew. Analysts scrambled to explain how Verity had made such a surgically timed expansion. Internal innovation, some said. New algorithmic positioning, others guessed. No one mentioned Evelyn, and that was the point. She didn't want her name in lights. She wanted the machine to cough, to stutter, to expose what happened when a company removed the very organ that knew the market's next breath. And now, the same CEO who'd called her team non-essential was about to go live to celebrate innovation. With charts, Evelyn made. With data, Evelyn flagged. With confidence, Evelyn watched crack like frost-thin glass. She sipped her coffee, looked at the clock. 2 days to go. She wasn't nervous. She had already seen the forecast. Subject line read. Quick attribution check interview. Friday. Evelyn spotted it between 2 auto-generated calendar pings from her soon-to-be dismantled team. It came from a Gmail address, something like corbinj@netviewprods, the kind of lowercase informality that screamed junior producer. Someone freshly caffeinated and tasked with fact-checking behind the scenes while executives rehearsed talking points in front of ring lights. She opened it. Hi, Evelyn. Prepping segments for this Friday's Insight Today feature on innovation strategy. Quick question, can you confirm authorship of the attached data visual? It was referenced in a public 10K from Verity Group and appears to have originated from your division. Totally routine, just need confirmation for attribution protocol. Appreciate it, Corbin J. NetView Business Features. She opened the attachment. There it was. Slide 3 of her scrubbed Mirror Lake bundle, and prediction curves showing consumer sentiment flux following product ecosystem fatigue. The watermark was faint, but still visible in the corner. DS147B V3 Final, her version, her fingerprint. The Verity filing had cited it in a footnote, attributing the data to a third-party insight report, compiled from anonymized behavioral modeling research. That line alone told her Alan had threaded the needle. They hadn't stolen it. They'd cited it ethically, indirectly, just enough to make the host curious. She clicked reply. Hi Corbin, yes, I authored that visual. Regards, Evelyn Price. That was it. No footnotes, no disclaimers, no grand reveal, just confirmation. Simple and sharp as a scalpel. Corbin replied within minutes. Thanks. We'll refer to it accordingly during segment B2. Won't be naming names unless prompted by our guest. Your team's work may be referenced contextually. Appreciate the clarification. Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to be on camera. She didn't need the chair, the makeup team, the false pleasantries from the host. The real power never sits under the lights. It sits just off stage, whispering direction through earpieces and choice cuts of what gets shown. She closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, watching the lines in the plaster like they might connect to something bigger, like constellations in beige. She had once thought she wanted credit for the patents, the breakthroughs, the innovations no one understood until they were too late to claim. But now she realized something far more potent than applause. She had built a lens, and now the right people were looking through it, on live TV. A man too busy polishing his own reflection to realize the view had changed. The dominoes were standing, neat, fragile, balanced. She had just flicked the first one. Live from a polished studio set in Midtown, the segment opened with bright lighting, backlit logos, and a chyron that read, Leadership in Innovation. Mark Keener, CEO, Orbix Techmark, sat in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Evelyn's server rack. He wore that signature CEO smirk, equal parts TED talk, and used car mystique, as if the words about to tumble from his mouth were already pre-approved by the gods of disruption. The host, Miles Dayton, had been doing this for decades, silver hair, sharp suit, smile that could slice drywall. But behind the teeth, you could always tell when Miles was loading the chamber. Mark, Miles began, you've made headlines lately with your strategic restructuring. Bold, some say. Others say risky. Tell us, what's the vision? Mark leaned in. Well, Miles, vision is clarity, focus. We looked hard at what drives innovation and what clutters it. And frankly, some departments just weren't core to our mission anymore. You can't let sentimentality weigh downscale. He smiled wider. We leaned out inefficiencies, redundant systems. We trimmed the organizational fat so the muscle could move faster. Behind the camera, a producer gave Miles the signal. Redundant, Miles echoed. He reached off-screen, casually retrieving a printed document, laminated for effect, held it up like a game show reveal. Would this be one of those redundancies? Mark's eyes landed on it, a graph. Sharp black lines spiking across a clean blue grid. A familiar watermark in the corner, DS147B V3 Final. Evelyn's visual. Miles continued, voice smooth as scotch. Because this slide here, sourced from your own internal analytics division, appears to have been cited by Verity Group in a public filing this week. That same division, I believe, was just disbanded. The camera zoomed slightly, subtle but surgical. Mark's smile froze a half-second too long. Well, he started, blinking once. Data visualization is often repurposed in our industry, and I'm not, personally involved in the day-to-day granularity of legacy modeling tools. Sure, Miles said, flipping to another page, except this one still carries your internal watermark. And it's been verified by the original author, Miss Evelyn Price, yes, who confirmed attribution with our team. The name landed like a punch wrapped in silk. Mark shifted in his chair, just slightly, but enough. Well, as I said, we're always evolving. Data, it's just one piece of the larger innovation puzzle, but it was your puzzle, Miles interrupted gently, for your competitor used it to beat you to market by 3/4. Silence. Just long enough for Twitter to explode. Screens lit up across the country. At FinWatchdog. Did this man just fire his entire brain trust on TV? At Analytica Chick, Evelyn Price is the quiet goat. This is corporate poetry. At CNBC Live Chat, oh my God, did he just get blindsided on air? Mark laughed, or tried to. It came out brittle, strained. Remain confident in our strategy, Miles. We've got incredible people in place, but not the people who built the forecast. Verity just turned into 20% growth, Miles said. Calm, final. The host shuffled his papers. The interview moved on to branding, to acquisitions, to buzzwords trying to claw their way out of a credibility sinkhole. But the story was already written. The internet didn't care about the rest. They'd seen the moment the mask cracked. And somewhere, in the studio, not on camera, but behind it all, Evelyn watched. No expression, no celebration, just a single, quiet breath and the weight of inevitability settling into place. The first Slack leak dropped less than 4 hours after the broadcast. A screenshot, clearly taken from a board access-only channel, spread across Twitter like wildfire. The message was short, brutal. Private who authorized the interview prep without vetting internal IP exposure. Also, why wasn't I briefed on DS147B's decommissioning? That model was cited in at least 2 major funding rounds last year. K. Greer, board chair, another followed. Mark needs to explain how we lost the model and the narrative. If Verity monetized our internal insight, that's not a comms issue. That's exposure. L. Fain, board observer by noon, internal morale was somewhere between Titanic violinist and scorched earth. Slack channels meant for lunch plans and coffee memes went dead quiet. People used emoji reactions like war drums, fire, eyes, skulls. Evelyn's phone buzzed with old names. Dev S., are you seeing this? He looked like he swallowed a stapler on live TV. Margot L., your chart. They held up your damn chart. Unknown number, respect. That was something else. Evelyn replied to none of them. Instead, she opened her admin console. In all the frenzy, scrambling, legal drafting responses, comms trying to plug leaks, no one had gotten around to revoking her server access. DS-147B's sandbox version was still intact. So was the outbound link to the neutral server cluster she'd been using for offloaded analysis. Read-only permissions, nothing proprietary anymore, just scaffolding. She double-checked the timestamp sync. Everything was in place. Then she uploaded 2 documents. Resignation letter, Evelyn Price, PDF dated. Professional. Clear. Effective immediately. 2. Statement. On the future of ethical predictive design, PDF, a polished press release. Crafted weeks ago. Timed embargo, 6:00 p.m. Set to auto-send to 6 industry outlets, 3 analyst firms, and 1 nonprofit newsletter focused on AI ethics and accountability. She tagged it with a quote, front and center. Prediction without context is noise. Context without memory? That's malpractice. EP, no rage, no tantrum. Just the calm efficiency of someone who doesn't beg for a seat, they build a new table. By 2:13 p.m., her exit meeting invite slid into her inbox. Moved up, hey Evelyn, can we connect today instead of Friday? Would love to close the loop. She declined the Zoom with a 2-word reply, see statement. Then she shut her laptop. The act felt surgical, like finishing a long, deliberate incision. There was no adrenaline, just gravity, collected, patient gravity pulling everything where it was meant to go. By 2:37 p.m., the news started to bleed. Former Orbix strategist resigns following Verity model controversy. Source confirms. Evelyn Price authored forecast behind Verity surge. Quiet architect of market disruption issues statement on ethics foresight. Evelyn didn't refresh. She didn't gloat. Instead, she walked outside into the dusk haze, street humming with rush hour, and let herself feel it, not triumph, but clearance. The kind of silence you get not from winning a fight, but from walking off the battlefield before they even realized the war had started. She was done playing defense. They expected her to disappear. Or maybe pivot into something forgettable, a consulting gig, a think tank, maybe even a soft-focused text talk about resilience in tech. Instead, Evelyn's next move detonated quietly at 9:00 a.m. Monday morning via a clean, 3-line announcement posted to a barely used LinkedIn page. Evelyn Price joins Ethos Institute Senior Fellow, Ethical Foresight Division, Advancing Accountable Machine Intelligence in Global Markets. No hashtags. No humble brags. No 20-paragraph origin story. But the subtext, earthquake. Ethos wasn't just some academic backwater. It was the new brainchild of a global AI governance effort, an independent consortium dedicated to ethical modeling, behavioral transparency, and long-term impact forecasting. The kicker, its foundational sponsor, Verity Group. That same Monday, Verity quietly filed an IP acquisition report listing 3 exclusive licensing contracts tied to a proprietary algorithm named Echo Farm PX. Evelyn's name was on everyone, because here's what no one at Orbix knew. Not Mark, not legal, not even the internal analytics team that had half-shadowed her work, but never asked the right questions. Mirror Lake was never the full engine. It was the output chamber. The real engine, the core logic, the recursive loop, the insight generator, was Echo Farm. It lived in a sandboxed, private repo spun up 3 years prior on a paid academic license. Built during weekends, holidays, downtime. Never merged, never committed under her Orbix credentials. It wasn't theft. It wasn't even gray. It was hers. And now she was licensing herself. 3 contracts, 5-year terms, market exclusivity optional. 1 went to Verity. 1 went to an emerging fintech building adaptive pricing models for developing nations. And 1, her favorite, went to a startup she partially funded anonymously, developing transparency metrics to detect corporate narrative manipulation in media. Poetic, really? No press conference. No interview circuit. She let the filings speak. The trade blogs caught on fast. Evelyn Price reemerges with Echo Farm licensing. Rival firms take note. Price's algorithm may shape predictive ethics market. From redundant to revolutionary, what Orbix let slip away. At Orbix HQ, things were quiet. Too quiet. Mark hadn't posted since the interview. The board had retreated into closed sessions. PR issued vague statements about misaligned optics and ongoing assessments of internal decision matrices. But none of that mattered anymore, because Evelyn didn't burn him. She outpaced him. He tried to frame her team as dead weight. Now she was redefining the scales. And what made it all sing? She wasn't screaming for justice. She wasn't dragging his name through dirt. He just proved, definitively, that he couldn't see past his own reflection long enough to recognize the future sitting 5 feet outside his glass office. And now, she was the future. Quiet, profitable, untouchable. The slide leaked on a Tuesday. Buried halfway into a 73-page shareholder update, the phrase stood out like a bruise on white silk. Market shifts caught us off guard. 3 bullet points below it. Q4 client attrition up 14.8%, enterprise renewals down 11%, top exit reason. Lack of strategic foresight. Evelyn read it on her phone, standing backstage at the Astra Forum in Vancouver, prepped, mic'd, dressed in charcoal gray with nothing flashy except the gleam in her eyes. The kind of gleam that says, "I told you so," but without needing to speak it. She was the closing speaker that day. At the main event, no pyrotechnics, no biotech CEOs with names like apps, but the final voice. The one they'd remember walking out. Her talk was titled, "Redundancy is a Vision Problem." When she stepped out under the spotlight, the auditorium wasn't packed with influencers or tech bros. It was full of product leads, ethics officers, systems engineers, and nervous executives trying to figure out how to not be obsolete. Exactly her people. He began without introduction. Just a slide, a sprawling living market map, real-time, color-coded sentiment clouds overlaid with supply chain signals and geolocated trust decay metrics. The audience collectively leaned forward. "This," she said, gesturing calmly, "is what happens when you treat insight as decoration instead of direction." Click, new slide, 2-line graphs. One labeled adoption curve, competitor A. Client loss trajectory, Orbix Q1 Q4. Click, heat map flare on sector volatility across regions their former CEO once dismissed as low impact. She let it hang there, not to gloat, to educate. Then she smiled, not smug, not bitter, just certain. "This isn't revenge," she said quietly, "it's clarity." The room went silent, no coughs, no typing. Just wait. Then applause, slow at first, then growing. Standing, she didn't rush off stage. He didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. Her model had predicted this moment too, not in ego, but in trajectory. Because that's what Echo Farm did best. It didn't predict people. It predicted patterns, and people were just variables who thought they were exempt. She exited stage left while the host tried to gather himself. Someone handed her water. Someone else tried to get her quote for a panel recap. She declined both, and when asked later by a reporter about her time at Orbix, she just tilted her head and said, "Oh, that chapter? Already processed." She never said Mark's name, not once. No need to. Legacy doesn't shout, it echoes. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.